Initiate the plan.
Full protocol.
At 1 a.m., a violent pounding shattered the silence of my empty house, the sound slicing through the brittle stillness like glass breaking in the dark. Sleep had long abandoned me. Insomnia had been my relentless shadow ever since Frank's death 8 years ago. But even wide awake, I wasn't prepared for visitors at this hour. 30 years as a court bailiff had taught me one thing: night knocks rarely carried good news. I moved cautiously toward the door, every instinct sharpened by decades of facing the unexpected. Through the peephole, the porch light carved my daughter's face into a trembling portrait of despair. Mascara streaked black rivers down her cheeks. Her shoulders shook violently, even through the warped glass. My heart lurched. I yanked the door open. "Rebecca!" She collapsed into my arms, her body convulsing with sobs, her voice breaking on a single word. "Mom." She struggled to breathe. "Carter's gone. He took everything, all our money, every account. He's been planning this for months." The words dissolved into a torrent of grief. A cold, familiar clarity descended over me, the same detached focus I'd worn like armor through courthouse chaos and last-minute crises. I wasn't surprised. Crushed for her, yes. Heartbroken, yes. But not surprised. I had been waiting, silently, for this night for 5 years, since the moment Rebecca first brought home that charming financial consultant with the flawless smile and evasive answers. "Come inside," I whispered, guiding her to the living room sofa, letting her spill the story between jagged breaths. Arriving home early to empty drawers, joint accounts drained to nothing, a cold, personal note from Carter, declaring he'd found someone who understands him better. His assistant Veronica had also vanished, as if swept into the same cruel wind. "I trusted him with everything, Mom." Rebecca's voice broke to a whisper. "The house, the investments, even Dad's inheritance. It's all gone." I wrapped an arm around her trembling shoulders, listening, silent but steady, until exhaustion dulled her sobs into hiccuping gasps. Then I stood. "Wait here." In my bedroom closet, behind the neat row of ordinary clothes, hung my bailiff's uniform. I hadn't planned to wear it again until Monday morning, but tonight demanded something different. Something that represented order against betrayal, steel against chaos. I dressed with ritual precision: navy tactical pants, the light blue shirt with the county emblem, polished black boots, and finally the badge. Not because I was on duty, but because Rebecca needed to see what I already knew: justice was not blind in this house. When I stepped back into the living room, Rebecca blinked at me through tear-swollen eyes, confusion briefly breaking her grief. "Mom, why are you in uniform?" I didn't answer. Instead, I lifted the phone, dialing a number etched into my memory. "Michael, it's Margaret Lawson. Initiate the plan. Yes, full protocol. I'll bring documentation at 7 a.m. I ended the call, then met my daughter's bewildered gaze head-on. "What plan? Mom, what's going on?" I sat beside her, gripping her cold hands. My voice was steady, steel-lined. "Rebecca, listen to me. What Carter has done isn't just betrayal, it's criminal, wire fraud, identity theft, maybe embezzlement. And I've been preparing for this moment since the day he tried to sell your house out from under you." Her eyes widened in shock. "You knew this would happen?" "I suspected," I corrected gently. "Men like Carter, I've seen their kind 100 times. No proof, only instincts. But I put safeguards in place. Safeguards that will help us track him, freeze what we can, and put him exactly where he belongs, behind bars. Michael isn't just my attorney. He's worked with the DA for 20 years. He knows the system inside and out." Rebecca wrenched her hands free, springing to her feet. "You were investigating my husband? You've been waiting for him to commit a crime?" I had expected this. Victims always turn first on those who try to protect them. My voice remained calm. "No, sweetheart, I've been protecting you quietly, in case my instincts proved right. I hoped I was wrong, but now we have maybe 48 hours before Carter hides the money where we'll never reach it." Her breath caught. "The Cayman Islands," she whispered. "He has a meeting there next week. He's been talking about it for months." I nodded grimly. Offshore. No extradition. It fits. I straightened, the badge on my chest catching the lamplight. Rebecca, you have to decide right now. Do you want to collapse under this betrayal or do you want to fight back? Because I'm ready to fight. But I need you with me. Something shifted in her then. Behind the tears, behind the tremors, her eyes hardened Frank's eyes. My husband's prosecutor fires staring back at me from our daughter's face. What do you need me to do? She asked, voice steady, strong. Everything, I said, leading her toward my office. Every account, every document, every signature, every word Carter ever spoke about money or property. We must be ready, because men like him rarely stop at just one lie. I opened the file I'd been building in silence for 3 years. Bank statements I'd copied, photographs of suspicious documents, notes from whispered conversations. Evidence stacked against a man my daughter had loved, but I had never trusted. Rebecca's eyes widened as truth unfolded page by page. "Oh my God," she whispered. "This is only the beginning," I told her softly, "and we have a long night ahead." The dawn broke hours later as we pulled into the parking lot of Harrington Legal Services. Rebecca sat beside me, her shock now hardened into resolve. The uniform I wore wasn't a costume. It was a promise to her, to Frank's memory, to myself. Carter had stolen from the wrong woman's daughter. He had chosen the wrong family. And now, judgment was coming for him. Every document I gathered, every contingency I planned, I hoped it would all be unnecessary. That one day I'd destroy that file and admit I had misjudged. Carter completely. I reached for her hand across the table. "Being right brings me no joy, Rebecca. Only the knowledge that you're not facing this alone." Her fingers tightened around mine. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, straightening my bailiff's uniform that I hadn't bothered to change out of. "We set a trap, and when Carter Bennett shows up at that airport tomorrow morning, he's going to discover that disappearing with stolen money isn't nearly as easy as he thought." As Michael returned with confirmation that the arrest arrangements were being made, I felt that familiar calm that had served me through decades of courthouse crisis. This wasn't just about recovering money. It was about something more fundamental. Showing my daughter that systems could work, that justice wasn't just an abstract concept, but a force that could be harnessed by those who understood its machinery. Carter had chosen the wrong family to betray. He just didn't know it yet. Sleep was impossible that night. Rebecca tossed and turned in my guest room while I sat at the kitchen table reviewing our strategy for the morning. Michael had arranged for 2 county deputies, both friends from my years at the courthouse, to meet us at the airport, along with an agent from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit who had taken a particular interest in the case, after learning Carter had potentially defrauded multiple clients at his firm. At 5 a.m., I knocked gently on Rebecca's door, though I suspected she was already awake. "It's time," I said when she opened it, eyes red, rimmed but alert. "We need to be at the airport by 6:30 to get in position." She nodded, already dressed in jeans and a simple, black sweater. I still can't believe he thought he would get away with this. Men like Carter operate on the assumption that their victims will be too embarrassed or overwhelmed to fight back effectively, I explained, pouring coffee into travel mugs. They count on confusion and delay. He didn't count on my mother being a bailiff with 30 years of connections, Rebecca said, a hint of pride breaking through her exhaustion. "No," I agreed, handing her a mug. I certainly didn't. I was once again wearing my uniform, not because I would be acting in any official capacity, but because I wanted Carter to see me exactly as I was, an officer of the court, a woman who had dedicated her life to the machinery of justice. The psychological impact would be worth any questions about my attire. The airport hummed with early morning activity. As we arrived, Michael was waiting at the designated meeting point near the security checkpoint, accompanied by deputies Carson and Jimenez, both in plain clothes but with badges discreetly visible on their belts. FBI agent Keller is already in position near the gate, Michael informed us, his usual composure tinged with the excitement of the hunt. TSA has confirmed Bennett checked in online at 4:30 this morning for his 8:15 flight. He hasn't gone through security yet. Rebecca scanned the terminal anxiously. What if he doesn't show? What if he's already found another way out of the country? Private flights still require customs clearance, I reminded her, and we have alerts in place at every exit point. If he's leaving today, it's almost certainly through this airport. Deputy Carson, a stocky veteran with 25 years on the force, gestured toward the security line. We've got plainclothes officers watching every checkpoint. Man fitting his description hasn't come through yet. What about Veronica? Rebecca asked suddenly. Should we be looking for her too? I exchanged glances with Michael, who nodded slightly. We should consider the possibility they're traveling separately to avoid detection. Do you have a recent photo of her? Rebecca pulled out her phone, scrolling through images until she found one from a company holiday party 6 months earlier. Veronica Hayes, a sleek brunette with a calculated smile, standing next to Carter. I'll send this to our team, Deputy Jimenez said, forwarding the image to the officers positioned throughout the terminal. For the next hour, we maintained our surveillance, tension building as the departure time approached. Travelers streamed through security, business people with efficient movements, families juggling luggage and children, solitary figures with headphones creating private bubbles in the public space. At 7:22 a.m., Deputy Carson's radio crackled. Possible. Subject sighting at checkpoint C, male matching description, traveling alone. My pulse quickened as we repositioned ourselves with a view of the checkpoint in question. And there he was, Carter Bennett, my son-in-law of 5 years, looking nothing like the polished financial advisor who had charmed his way into my daughter's life. His normally perfect hair was hidden under a baseball cap, designer suits replaced by nondescript jeans and a gray hoodie. He carried a single carry-on bag and kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with TSA personnel. Beside me, Rebecca inhaled sharply. That's him, and he's alone. We wait until he clears security, Michael murmured. The arrest warrant specifies he's to be taken into custody before boarding, but after clearing the checkpoint, less chance of him running. I watched Carter place his bag on the conveyor belt, remove his shoes, empty his pockets with the practiced motions of a frequent traveler. He passed through the body scanner without incident, collected his belongings, and began walking toward the concourse that would lead to his gate. Now, Michael said into his phone, giving the signal to the officers positioned ahead. What happened next unfolded with the choreographed precision of a well-planned operation. 2 TSA officers and Agent Keller converged on Carter from different directions, cutting off potential escape routes. Deputy Carson moved forward to make the actual arrest badge clearly visible as he approached. Carter Bennett, I'm Deputy Carson with the County Sheriff's Department. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. From our position, I could see the moment panic replaced confusion on Carter's face. His head swiveled, looking for exits, but he was completely boxed in. His shoulders slumped in defeat as Deputy Carson secured his wrists with handcuffs. I want to see him, Rebecca said suddenly, stepping forward before I could stop her. I followed closely as she approached the group of officers now surrounding her husband. Carter's eyes widened when he saw her, then narrowed when he noticed me behind her, resplendent in my bailiff's uniform. Rebecca, he began, his voice taking on the smooth, persuasive tone I'd heard him use countless times. This is all a misunderstanding. I was just moving our money to protect it from market volatility. If you'll just save it, she cut him off, her voice remarkably steady. The wire transfers to the Cayman Islands, the forged signature on my home. Equity line, the emptied accounts. That's not protection, Carter. That's theft. His gaze shifted to me, comprehension dawning. You, he said flatly, you never liked me, never gave me a chance. I maintained my professional demeanor, the same impassive expression I'd perfected. Through thousands of courthouse proceedings, I gave you 5 years of chances, Mr. Bennett. You used them to steal from my daughter and plan your escape. Agent Keller stepped forward. We need to process him. The warrant includes a search of his personal effects. Of course, I nodded. Professional courtesy between law enforcement personnel. As Deputy Carson began leading Carter away, Rebecca called out, "Where's Veronica? Isn't she supposed to be your getaway companion?" Something flickered across Carter's face. Surprise, confusion, then a carefully blank expression. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your assistant," Rebecca pressed. "The one you've been having an affair with. The one who's mysteriously absent from work at the same time you decide to disappear. With all our money." Carter's laugh was short and bitter. "Veronica, she's probably at the office right now. She was never part of this." Rebecca blinked, momentarily thrown by this unexpected response. "But your note said you'd found someone who understands you better." "Figure of speech," Carter replied, a hint of his usual arrogance returning despite the handcuffs. "This was never about another woman, Rebecca. It was about freedom, from debt, from obligations, from expectations I never wanted to fulfill." The revelation struck Rebecca visibly, the understanding that she hadn't been replaced by another woman, but simply discarded as an inconvenience. In some ways, this seemed to cut deeper than the financial betrayal. I placed a steadying hand on her shoulder as the officers led Carter away toward the airport security office, where he would be formally processed before transport to the county detention center. "He was going alone," she said quietly once he was out of sight. "All this time I imagined them together, laughing at me spending my money, but he was just leaving everyone. Narcissists. I rarely form genuine attachments," I replied, guiding her toward a seating area where Michael waited. "The only relationship that matters to someone like Carter is the one with himself." As we sat down, Michael spread out a preliminary inventory of items found in Carter's possession: $12,000 in cash, 5 credit cards in different names, a passport with recent stamps from several countries known for banking, privacy, and, most importantly, a thumb drive that forensic analysts would soon discover contained account numbers and access codes for the offshore accounts he had established. "This is an excellent start," Michael assured us. "With the evidence seized here and the freeze orders already in place, we have a strong chance of recovering a significant portion of the stolen funds." Rebecca nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "I still don't understand how I missed the signs, how I could have been so completely wrong about someone I lived with for 5 years. I thought of the countless victims I'd seen in the courthouse, intelligent, capable people who had been deceived by those they trusted most. Con artists. Like Carter succeed because they're expert at appearing to be exactly what their targets want and need. It's not a reflection on you that you believed him. It's a testament to how practiced he was at deception." As we left the airport, the sun had fully risen on what promised to be a grueling but productive day of statements, formal charges, and continued financial tracing. Carter was in custody, but our work was just beginning. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked as we reached the car. "Now," I said, unlocking the doors, "we follow the money. Every account, every transfer, every forged document, we build a case. So solid that Carter has no choice but to cooperate if he wants any hope of leniency." What I didn't add was the thought completing itself in my mind, and we discovered just how deep this rabbit hole goes. Because 30 years in, the courthouse had taught me that initial betrayals often concealed even larger deceptions waiting to be uncovered. Carter's arrest wasn't the end of this story. In many ways it was. Just the beginning. "It's worse than we thought," Michael said grimly, spreading documents across my dining room table 3. Days after Carter's arrest, Rebecca and I exchanged glances. We had spent the intervening days in a whirlwind of legal meetings, forensic financial analysis, and emotional processing. Carter remained in county detention, his bail set at $500,000 after prosecutors argued successfully that he posed a significant flight risk. "Worse, how?" I asked, though the thickness of the file Michael had brought suggested a complexity beyond simple theft. Michael sorted the papers into organized piles. "The FBI's analysis," of Carter's thumb drive and initial investigation into Meridian Advisors indicates this goes far beyond your accounts, Rebecca. Carter appears to have been systematically defrauding clients for at least 3 years. Rebecca appalled his clients, the people who trusted him with their retirement funds. Exactly. Michael pointed to a spreadsheet. Based on preliminary findings, he diverted approximately $3 to $1 million from at least 14 different clients, primarily targeting elderly investors or recently widowed women, managing money for the first time. The predatory pattern made my stomach turn. In my years at the courthouse, I'd seen countless financial crimes, but those targeting vulnerable populations had always struck me as particularly despicable. No wonder he could afford our lifestyle, Rebecca murmured, the pieces falling into place. The luxury, vacations, the expensive car, the country club membership. I always assumed he was just good at his job. She looked up, fresh horror dawning. Oh God, those dinner parties we hosted. Were those potential victims? Was I unknowingly helping him find new targets? Michael's expression softened, with rare compassion. You were as much a victim as anyone else, Rebecca. More so, because he used your good name and reputation to establish credibility with others. I reached for Rebecca's hand, finding it cold and trembling. This isn't your fault, I insisted. Carter is. A con man who happened to marry one of his marks. Which brings us to an unexpected complication, Michael continued, pulling out a particular document. The FBI has officially taken over the case due to the interstate nature of the fraud and the number of victims involved. They're expanding the investigation to include potential money laundering and securities fraud. How is that a complication? I asked. Sounds like they're taking it seriously. The complication, Michael clarified, is that they want Rebecca to cooperate in building the larger case. Specifically, they're interested in her providing testimony about Carter's activities, business associations, and any documents she might have seen or signed unwittingly. Rebecca straightened. Of course, I'll cooperate. I want him held accountable. It's not that simple, Michael cautioned. Cooperating means potentially being named in court. Documents, giving depositions, testifying in open court. Your association with Carter, however, innocent, will become part of the public record. It could affect your professional reputation, your credit standing, even future employment opportunities. The implication hung heavily in the room. Rebecca's career in corporate communications had already been jeopardized by her extended absence during this crisis. Public association with a major fraud case could make finding new employment considerably more difficult. What's the alternative? She asked quietly. Focus solely on recovering your personal funds. Let the FBI build their larger case without your direct involvement. It might mean a slightly slower recovery process for you, but greater privacy protection. I watched Rebecca consider this, seeing the same internal struggle I'd observed when she was a child, facing difficult choices, the weighing of personal benefit against broader principles. If I don't help, she said slowly, what happens to the other victims, the elderly clients, the widows? The FBI will still pursue the case, Michael assured her. They have substantial evidence from the thumb drive and Carter's records. Your testimony would strengthen their position, but it's not the sole determining factor. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a resolve that reminded me powerfully of her father. I need to help them, she decided. These people trusted Carter partly because of me, because I was the respectable wife who legitimized him in their eyes. If my testimony helps recover their savings or prevents him from hurting others, that's more important than protecting my privacy. Pride swelled in my chest. Despite everything Carter had taken from her, money, security, trust, he hadn't managed to steal her fundamental fust, decency. There's one more thing you should know, Michael said, his expression grave. In reviewing Carter's personal effects seized during the arrest, investigators found documentation suggesting this isn't his first financial scheme. They've linked him to similar operations in Florida and Arizona operating under different names. Different names? Rebecca repeated, confusion evident in her voice. Michael nodded, sliding a photocopy across the table. 3 driver's licenses with Carter's photograph, but different names: Daniel Carson, Charles Benton, and Carter Bennett. Your husband's real name appears to be Alexander Caldwell, Michael explained gently. He's been assuming new identities and running similar schemes for approximately 12 years. Rebecca stared at the document, her world visibly crumbling further. I didn't even know his real name, she whispered. Who did I marry? A professional con artist, I said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. The charm, the conveniently to the vague background. The expertise in separating people from their money. It wasn't just his job. It was his entire perfected and divine identity. There's more, Michael continued reluctantly. Preliminary investigation suggests he has at least 2 other marriages that were never legally dissolved, which means my marriage was never valid, Rebecca finished, a strange laugh escaping her. I'm not even legally his wife. I don't know whether to be devastated or relieved. The revelations continued mounting as Michael walked us through. The FBI's initial findings. Carter Alexander had operated in at least 4 states, targeting affluent communities. With large retiree populations, his pattern was consistent: establish himself as a financial advisor, build a client base through social connections, gradually siphon funds while providing falsified statements, then disappear when discovery became imminent or he'd accumulated sufficient wealth. What makes this case particularly significant, Michael explained, is that we caught him before he could fully disappear. In previous instances, victims didn't discover the theft until he was long gone, the trail cold. Because of Mom, Rebecca said, giving me a look that contained both gratitude and lingering hurt at my years of silent vigilance, because she recognized what he was when I couldn't. The credit goes to both of you, Michael corrected. Your immediate action when you discovered the theft, Rebecca, was crucial. Many victims waste precious days in denial or confusion. As Michael gathered his documents to leave, promising updates as the federal investigation progressed, Rebecca remained at the table, staring at the photocopy of Carter's false identifications. I'm an intelligent woman, she said once we were alone. I have a master's degree. I manage communications for major corporate clients. How could I not see this? I sat beside her, choosing my words carefully. Con artists, like Carter or Alexander or whatever his real name is, succeed precisely because they target intelligent, accomplished people. If you were truly gullible or unsophisticated, you wouldn't have had the resources worth stealing. That's cold comfort, she murmured. There's something else to consider, I added. Your father was only gone for 3 years when you met Carter. You were still grieving, still adjusting to his absence. Carter offered security, financial expertise, things Frank had provided before his death. She looked up sharply. You think I was trying to replace Dad? Not consciously, I clarified. But grief creates vulnerabilities even in the strongest people. Carter sensed that and exploited it. That's what predators do. They identify emotional needs and position themselves as the solution. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this perspective. When does the shame go away? She finally asked. The feeling that I should have known better. I thought of the thousands of victims I'd seen move through the courthouse over 3 decades, dignified. Elderly women scammed out of retirement funds, successful businessmen caught in investment fraud, intelligent young people seduced by romance scams, all asking some version of the same question. How could I have been so blind? The shame fades when you realize that trust isn't a weakness, I told her. Carter didn't succeed because you were foolish. He succeeded because you have the normal, healthy human capacity for trust. He's the broken one, not you. As evening settled around us, Rebecca finally went upstairs to shower and rest. I remained at the dining table, surrounded by the paper trail of deception that had nearly destroyed my daughter's life. The bailiff in me recognized the familiar patterns of fraud and calculated manipulation. The mother in me burned with a cold fury that someone had deliberately targeted my child. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more legal complexities, more painful realizations for Rebecca. But tonight had shown me something crucial. Beneath the shock and heartbreak, my daughter's moral compass remained intact. When offered an easier path that might have protected her reputation at the expense of other victims, she had chosen the harder road of full cooperation. Carter had stolen her money and shattered her trust, but he hadn't managed to break her fundamental character. In the language of the courthouse where I'd spent my career, that was the most damning evidence against him and the most promising sign of Rebecca's eventual recovery. "There are 2 other wives," said FBI agent Diana Keller, her crisp pants, suit, and direct gaze projecting professional efficiency. Both still alive, both still legally married to Alexander Caldwell, and both financially devastated by his schemes. A week had passed since our meeting with Michael about the expanding federal investigation. Rebecca and I now sat in a private conference room at the FBI's field office, where Agent Keller had called us for what she described as a tuning. Significant development in the case? Rebecca leaned forward, hands clasped tightly on the polished table. "You found them? The other women he married?" "Yes," Agent Keller confirmed, opening a folder containing photographs. Catherine Winters, 41, married to Alexander when he was using the name Daniel Carson in Tampa, Florida, and Maria Suarez, 38, married to him as Charles Benton in Noun, Phoenix, Arizona. She slid the photographs across the table. 2 women, both attractive and professional, looking, both with the same haunted expression I'd seen in Rebecca's eyes since that 1 a.m. knock on my door. "Neither marriage was ever legally dissolved," Agent Keller continued, "which means Alexander Caldwell committed bigamy 3 times over. More importantly for our case, he used each marriage to establish credibility and access investment clients in each location." Rebecca studied the photographs, her expression unreadable. "Have you spoken with them? Do they know about me? About each other?" "We've interviewed both women extensively," Agent Keller confirmed. "They were initially identified through the documentation seized from Mr. Caldwell's possession at the time of arrest, and they've been extremely cooperative with our investigation." She hesitated briefly before continuing, "Which brings me to the purpose of today's meeting. We believe there would be significant value in having all 3 of you compare experiences, timelines, and financial records. Patterns we might miss individually could become evident when your stories are examined collectively." "You want us to meet?" Rebecca asked, surprise evident in her voice. "A secure video conference initially," Agent Keller clarified. "If you're comfortable proceeding further after that, perhaps an in-person meeting as the case progresses toward trial." I watched Rebecca carefully, aware that this represented yet another emotional hurdle in an already overwhelming process. Meeting Carter's other victims was one thing. Meeting women who had also believed themselves to be his wife entered entirely different psychological territory. What would this accomplish? Beyond comparing notes? I asked, protective instincts surfacing. Rebecca has already agreed to cooperate fully with your investigation. Agent Keller nodded, acknowledging the concern behind my question. Beyond the investigative value, there's also a practical financial aspect. All 3 women have potential claims against any recovered assets. Establishing a collaborative relationship now, rather than an adversarial one later, could streamline the recovery process for everyone involved. Rebecca had gone quiet, still studying the photographs. "How long was he with them?" she finally asked before he disappeared. 4 years with Catherine, 3 with Maria, Agent Keller replied. "You appear to have been his longest relationship at 5 years. A bitter laugh escaped Rebecca. "Lucky me, I got the extended version of the scam." "Actually," Agent Keller said carefully, "the extended timeline in your case might be significant. Based on the evidence we've gathered, Alexander Caldwell typically maintained each identity for approximately 3 to 4 years before moving on. Something about your situation caused him to extend his timeline. I considered this new information. The difference might be me, I suggested. In his previous relationships, was there family nearby? People watching closely? Agent Keller's expression showed professional appreciation for the bratted insight. Neither Catherine nor Maria had close family involvement. Catherine's parents are deceased and Maria's family is in Mexico with limited contact, so I was the complication. I concluded the court bailiff mother-in-law, who never fully trusted him, which may have ultimately protected Rebecca from worse financial damage. Agent Keller noted, "Our analysis suggests he was preparing for his exit for at least a year, but moving more cautiously than in his previous operations." Rebecca finally looked up from the photographs. "I want to meet them," she decided. "These women, if we've all been through the same nightmare, maybe together we can make some sense of it, or at least help ensure he can't do this to anyone else." Agent Keller nodded, satisfied with the response. "I'll arrange the video conference for tomorrow morning if that works for your schedule." As we left the work at Federal Building afterward, Rebecca was uncharacteristically quiet, lost in thought as we walked to the parking garage. "Are you sure about this?" I asked gently as we reached my car. "Meeting the other wives is bound to be emotionally complicated." "Wives?" she repeated, testing the word. "The legal wife is Maria, technically, since she was first. Catherine and I were never legally his wives at all." She shook her head, a sad smile touching her lips. "Isn't that absurd? I'm actually upset about not legally being married to a man who stole from me and countless others." "It's not absurd," I assured her, unlocking the car. "Marriage carries profound emotional and social significance, regardless of the legal technicalities. Finding out yours wasn't legally valid is another loss to process." During the drive home, Rebecca finally voiced the question I sensed had been troubling her since Agent Keller's revelations. "Do you think he ever cared? About any of us? Even a little? Or were we all just convenient access to financial targets?" It was the question every victim of relationship fraud eventually faced. Had any of it been real? Had there been moments of genuine connection amid the calculated deception? The need to believe we haven't been completely blind, that we recognized at least some truth amid the lies runs deep in human psychology. I don't know, I answered honestly. People like Alexander Caldwell operate differently from those with normal emotional capacity. They can simulate caring convincingly while feeling very little actual attachment. "That's not very comforting," Rebecca murmured. "I know, but here's what I do know for certain," I continued. "Whether he felt anything genuine or not doesn't reflect on you or your capacity to love. You brought real emotion, real commitment to your relationship. That those qualities were exploited rather than reciprocated speaks to his deficiencies, not yours." The next morning found us in a secure conference room at Michael's office, where the FBI had arranged the video call with Catherine and Maria. Technical staff ensured the connection was properly encrypted, then left us alone, with Agent Keller to await the others' arrival. Rebecca had dressed carefully for the meeting, professional, but not overly formal, as if attending a business meeting rather than a deeply personal confrontation with her husband's other victims. I recognized the choice as psychological armor, the same approach I'd seen countless witnesses adopt in the courtroom when facing difficult testimony. The screen flickered to life, revealing a split view of two women in similar conference rooms, Catherine blonde and tailored in Tampa, Maria dark-haired and elegant in Phoenix. For a moment, no one spoke. Three women who had never met yet shared the most intimate form of betrayal, simply observing each other across digital space. "Well," Catherine finally said, her slight southern accent breaking the silence, "I guess we're the world's most exclusive club now. Women who thought they were married to Alexander Caldwell." The unexpected humor cracked the tension. Maria smiled faintly, and Rebecca let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "I'm Rebecca. My daughter introduced herself. "And this is my mother, Margaret the bailiff," Maria noted, her gaze shifting. "To me. Agent Keller mentioned you were instrumental in catching him on behalf of women everywhere." "Thank you," I nodded. Acknowledgement, but kept my focus on Rebecca. This was her conversation, her process to navigate. I was present as support, not to lead the discussion. For the next 2 hours, the 3 women shared their stories, how they met, Alexander in his various identities, the courtships that now revealed identical patterns, the gradual consolidation of financial control, and finally, the devastating discoveries of his betrayal. The similarities were striking. All 3 women were successful professionals. All had experienced recent loss before meeting him. All had been gradually isolated from close friends who might have noticed warning signs. "He told me my friends were jealous of our relationship," Catherine recalled, shaking her head at her own fawn. Vulnerability. And I believed him because it was easier than questioning why they had concerns. With me, it was my brother, Maria added. "Carlos never trusted Daniel or Charles or whatever." His real name, Island Alexander, managed to create so much tension that I eventually stopped inviting my brother to our home. Rebecca nodded in recognition. He was constantly finding fault with my closest college friend until I just stopped, trying to maintain the friendship. It was easier to keep the peace. As they continued comparing experiences, I observed something remarkable happening. With each shared story, each recognized manipulation tactic, a visible weight seemed to lift from all 3 women, the isolation that so often compounds the trauma of fraud. The belief that you, alone, were foolish enough to be deceived, dissolved in the recognition of shared experience. "He told both of you he couldn't have children?" Rebecca asked at one point, leaning forward with sudden intensity. Catherine and Maria both nodded. "Medical condition from a childhood illness?" Catherine confirmed. "He showed me doctor's reports," Maria added. "Very official looking." Rebecca sat back, a strange expression crossing her face. "He told me the same thing. I always wondered." She trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. As the meeting concluded with arrangements for future collaboration, I noticed a subtle but significant shift in Rebecca's demeanor, a straightening of her shoulders, a clarity in her gaze that had been missing since Carter's betrayal. Walking back to the car afterward, she finally completed her interrupted thought from the meeting. "I always wondered if I was somehow deficient because we never conceived, despite not using protection. He let me believe it might be my fault while knowing all along he'd created a convenient lie." The depth of the psychological manipulation made my blood boil, but I kept my tone measured. Another calculated cruelty. "Did you want children with him?" "I thought I did," she said thoughtfully. "But now I'm relieved. Can you imagine if there had been a child involved in all this?" Another innocent victim of his schemes. The wisdom in her observation reminded me that healing often begins with recognizing the disasters narrowly, avoided alongside those experienced. As we drove home, Rebecca continued, processing the meeting, finding strength in the connections formed with women who truly understood her experience in ways even I, with all my courthouse wisdom and maternal love, could not. "They're both rebuilding their lives," she noted. "Catherine has her own business now. Maria is in law school. They didn't let him destroy their futures. Neither will you," I assured her, glimpsing in her renewed determination the resilient daughter I'd raised, the one who had always emerged stronger from life's challenges. From skinned knees to teenage heartbreaks to her father's untimely death, Alexander Caldwell had underestimated all 3 of the women he had claimed as wives. But his greatest miscalculation had been assuming that Rebecca's relationship with me was as superficial and manipulable as the family connections he had previously encountered. He had never understood that in targeting my daughter, he had unwittingly challenged a woman who had spent 30 years watching justice unfold. In all its methodical, inexorable power, a woman who knew exactly how to set its machinery in motion when someone she loved was threatened. A woman who wore her bailiff's uniform not just as professional attire but as a declaration of purpose. Those who violated the fundamental rules of human decency would eventually face judgment. And that judgment was coming for Alexander Caldwell, one meticulous legal step at a time. We've frozen approximately $1.8 million in assets directly linked to Alexander Caldwell. Agent Keller announced her satisfaction evident despite her professional demeanor. That represents roughly 60% of what we believe he stole from clients and personal relationships over the past decade. A month had passed since the initial video conference with Catherine and Maria. In that time, the FBI's financial investigation had expanded dramatically, tracing money through a labyrinthine network of accounts, shell companies, and cryptocurrency exchanges. Rebecca, Catherine, and Maria had established a regular communication pattern, sharing documentation and memories that repeatedly provided investigators with new leads. We sat now in the federal prosecutor's office, Rebecca and I, joined by Michael, Agent Keller, and Assistant U.S. Attorney James Donovan, a serious man with prematurely gray hair and the focused intensity of someone who had spent his career pursuing white-collar criminals. The good news, Donovan continued, is that we have a clear path to recovering most of those frozen assets for distribution to victims. The challenge is establishing a fair distribution method given the number of victims and varying levels of financial harm. Rebecca leaned forward. What about the money that hasn't been recovered? The remaining 40%. Agent Keller and Donovan exchanged glances. We believe a significant portion was converted to cash or physical assets we haven't yet located, Keller explained. Based on patterns from his previous operations, Alexander likely has storage facilities or safety deposit boxes in multiple locations, which is where you're present to that. Continued cooperation becomes particularly valuable, Donovan added. Each of you, Catherine, and Maria, might unknowingly hold information that could lead us to these hidden assets. A casual comment he made, a location he visited repeatedly, habits you observed during your relationships. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. He was always meticulous about handling certain errands alone. Monthly trips he insisted on making himself, usually to locations at least an hour away from our home. Exactly the kind of pattern we're looking for, Agent Keller confirmed. We've already identified 3 storage facilities based on information from Catherine and Maria. Each contained physical assets, gold coins, jewelry, collectible watches worth approximately $85,000 total. The methodical approach to asset recovery reminded me of countless financial crime cases I'd witnessed from my bailiff's position, the patient unraveling of complex schemes, the gradual reassembly of financial puzzles designed to confuse and mislead. What made this case unusual was the personal element. The victims weren't just faceless investors or distant corporations, but women who had shared their lives, their homes, their dreams with the perpetrator. What about our individual financial recoveries? Rebecca asked, the practical question that most directly affected her immediate future, the money he took from. My accounts, the fraudulent home equity loan. Your case is actually the most straightforward, Michael interjected. Since we caught him before he could move most of your funds offshore, we've already secured court orders releasing Blaun approximately $162,000 back to you. That represents about 65% of what was taken from your personal and joint accounts. Relief washed over Rebecca's face. The first concrete good news in a month of revelations and legal complexities. When the funds should be released to your new accounts within 72 hours, Michael confirmed. The home equity loan has been invalidated based on the forgery evidence, so that's no longer a concern. Your house is secure. I squeezed Rebecca's hand, sharing her relief at this tangible progress. The financial recovery wouldn't erase the emotional damage of betrayal, but it would provide essential practical stability as she rebuilt her life. There's one more matter we need to discuss, Donovan said, his tone shifting slightly. Alexander Caldwell has offered to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for consideration during sentencing. Rebecca stiffened beside me. What kind of cooperation? Information on the location of additional assets, Agent Keller explained. Names of accomplices who helped him establish false identities and move money. Details of other financial schemes he may have knowledge of. And what would he get in return? I asked, the practical courthouse professional in me automatically evaluating the potential deal. We're considering recommending a sentence of 1,520 years rather than the 2,530 he's likely facing without cooperation, Donovan replied frankly. No possibility of probation. No reduction in financial restitution requirements. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, processing this development. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. Will his cooperation help recover more funds for his victims? Not just me, but the elderly clients, Catherine, Maria, everyone. Potentially, yes, Agent Keller confirmed, especially if he reveals locations of physical assets or offshore accounts we haven't yet identified. Rebecca nodded slowly. Then, I won't object. The money matters more to his victims than whether he serves 15 years or 30. Either way, his life as he knew, it is over. The maturity of her response, prioritizing practical recovery for all victims over maximum punishment, filled me with quiet pride. Throughout this ordeal, Rebecca had consistently demonstrated a capacity for perspective that spoke to her fundamental character. As we left the federal building after finalizing details of the asset recovery process, Rebecca seemed lighter, more present than she had been since that 1 a.m. knock on my door. I can move forward now, she said as we walked to the car. With actual money in my accounts, the house secure, I can start rebuilding. Yes, I agreed, relief evident in my voice. The practical foundations are being restored. The emotional rebuilding will take longer, but you're already well on that path too. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I sensed had been forming for weeks. How long can I stay with you, Mom? I know the house is legally mine again, but the thought of living there, alone, with all those memories. You can stay as long as you need, I assured her immediately. Months, years, whatever. It feels right. The upstairs apartment is yours, the space I had presciently prepared months earlier, sensing that Rebecca might someday need a refuge, had become her sanctuary during this crisis. Initially intended as temporary emergency housing, it had evolved into a genuine home, a place where she could process her trauma while surrounded by support. I was thinking, she said hesitantly as we drove, about what comes next professionally. My communications firm has been incredibly understanding about my extended leave, but I'm not sure I want to return to corporate work. What are you considering instead? I asked, curious about this new direction in her thinking. Catherine mentioned that her financial literacy organization is expanding, Rebecca explained. They educate people, especially women, about financial self-protection, investment basics, how to recognize warning signs of fraud. She thinks my communications background could be valuable in developing their programs and messaging. The elegant symmetry of this potential path, transforming personal trauma into protection for others, struck me as both healing and purposeful. That sounds like meaningful work, I observed, using your professional skills to prevent what happened to you from happening to others. It wouldn't pay as well as corporate communications, she acknowledged, at least not initially, which is why having a place to stay while I transition would be so helpful. Consider it handled, I assured her. Your housing is secure for as long as you need. That evening, as Rebecca coordinated with the bank about her recovering funds, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey we had traveled since that middle-of-the-night knock. The immediate crisis had evolved into methodical recovery, financial, emotional, and practical. The shocked victim who had appeared trembling at my door was gradually re-emerging as the confident, purposeful woman I had raised. My phone chimed with a text from Agent Keller. Search warrant, executed at safe deposit box location in Tulsa based on Caldwell's cooperation. Recovered. approximately $215,000 in negotiable bonds and collector coins. More victim funds secured. I showed the message to Rebecca, who smiled with grim satisfaction. See, his cooperation is already helping recover more for the victims. That matters more than whether he serves 15 years or 30. You've maintained your perspective remarkably well through all of this, I noted, impressed by her continued ability to see beyond personal vengeance to practical justice. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, then said something that revealed how deeply she had processed the experience. I've realized there are two kinds of justice, Mom. The kind that punishes wrongdoers and the kind that restores what was taken. Both matter. But for victims, restoration is usually more healing than punishment. The insight struck me as profound, particularly coming from someone in the midst of processing her own victimization. In my 30 years at the Depernation courthouse, I had indeed witnessed the difference between cases focused primarily on punishing offenders versus those structured to restore victims. The latter, while often less dramatically satisfying, typically produced more complete healing for those harmed. That's wisdom many people in the justice system never fully grasp. I told her, genuine admiration in my voice. As we sat together in the growing evening darkness, I recognized that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship through this ordeal. The mother-daughter dynamic had evolved into something more balanced, a partnership of mutual respect and shared purpose. My role had expanded beyond protective, apparent to include mentor, colleague, and ally in a fight for justice that had become our shared mission. Alexander Caldwell had targeted Rebecca, believing she was isolated and vulnerable despite her outward success. His fundamental miscalculation had been failing to recognize the strength of the connection between us, a bond that had not only survived his manipulations, but had emerged stronger through the process of fighting back. Some predators, I reflected, make the mistake of seeing only the apparent vulnerability of their chosen victims, missing entirely the resilience and resources that lie beneath the surface. Alexander had seen Rebecca's warm heart and trusting nature as weaknesses to exploit, never imagining those same qualities would connect her to a network of support that would ultimately ensure his downfall. It was a lesson the courthouse had taught me repeatedly over 3 decades. Justice may move methodically, but when properly engaged, it moves inexorably toward truth. All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Martinez, presiding. 6 months after Alexander Caldwell's arrest, I stood at my customary position in Federal Courtroom 3, calling the court to order for his sentencing hearing. After extensive negotiations, he had pleaded guilty to 27 counts of wire fraud, identity theft, securities fraud, and bigamy in exchange for his continued cooperation with authorities investigating related financial crimes. My presence as bailiff for this particular hearing was unusual. Typically, I would have recused myself, given my personal connection to the case. But Judge Martinez, aware of the full circumstances, had specifically requested I serve, believing it sent an important message about the integrity of the justice system. A victim's mother, who also happens to be an officer of the court, should not have to step aside, she had stated when the defense initially raised concerns. If anything, her presence demonstrates that justice applies equally regardless of personal connections. As Alexander was led into the courtroom in Prison Orange, handcuffed and flanked by marshals, our eyes met briefly. In the months since his arrest, he had aged noticeably, the designer haircut grown out to reveal natural gray, the confident posture diminished by confinement, the charming smile replaced by calculated blankness. Behind me in the gallery sat Rebecca, flanked by Catherine and Maria. The 3 women had developed a remarkable bond through their shared experience, transforming initial awkwardness into genuine friendship and mutual support. Together, they had provided crucial testimony and evidence that had strengthened the prosecution's case immeasurably. Judge Martinez, a formidable woman whose reputation for fairness was matched only by her and intolerance for deception, reviewed the case file before addressing the defendant. Mr. Caldwell, before I pronounce sentence, you have the right to make a statement to this court. Do you wish to do so? Alexander rose, his attorney beside him. The charming financial advisor who had won Rebecca's heart was nowhere visible in the subdued figure who now addressed the court. Your Honor, I accept responsibility for my actions and the harm I've caused, he began, his voice lacking the smooth confidence I remembered. My cooperation has been offered in good faith, and I will continue to assist authorities in recovering assets for my victims. I recognize that no apology can undo the damage I've caused, but I am sincerely sorry. The practice statement, likely crafted by his attorney to maximize sentencing consideration, rang hollow in the courtroom. Behind me, I heard one of the women, Maria, I thought, make a soft sound of disbelief. Judge Martinez studied Alexander for a long moment before speaking. Mr. Caldwell, this court has considered your guilty plea and subsequent cooperation. We have also considered the extraordinary harm you have caused, not just financial harm, though that is substantial, but profound emotional and psychological damage to people who trusted you completely. She lifted a document from her bench. I have here victim impact statements from 32 individuals whose lives were directly affected by your schemes. They describe lost retirement savings, depleted college funds, homes re-mortgaged without consent, and most disturbingly, the devastating loss of trust that many victims say has altered their ability to form relationships and function in society. The judge's gaze remained unwavering. While your cooperation has indeed aided in asset recovery, the court finds that it does not substantially mitigate the calculated nature of your crimes or the extensive planning they required. Your actions were not momentary lapses of judgment, but years-long deceptions designed specifically to harm vulnerable individuals for your personal gain. Attention filled the courtroom as everyone present realized the negotiated sentencing recommendation might not be followed. Therefore, this court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 20 years. Additionally, you are ordered to make full restitution to all victims in the amount of $8 million, and you are permanently barred from any employment involving financial management or advisory services. The sentence, significantly higher than the prosecution's recommendation of 15 to 20 years, sent a ripple through the courtroom. Alexander's attorney immediately leaned in to whisper urgently in his ear, likely explaining potential grounds for appeal based on the deviation from the negotiated terms. Judge Martinez, anticipating this and reaction, addressed it directly. Let the record show that while this court acknowledges the defendant's cooperation, the extent and duration of his predatory behavior, coupled with the calculated targeting of vulnerable individuals, constitutes exceptional circumstances warranting an upward departure from sentencing guidelines. As I called for all to rise while the judge departed, I maintained my professional demeanor despite the profound satisfaction I felt witnessing justice served so definitively. Alexander was led away, his facade of contrition replaced by barely contained anger at the unexpected sentence. Only when court was adjourned did I finally turn to meet Rebecca's gaze, the complex emotions in her eyes, relief, vindication, lingering pain, and something like closure, reflected my own feelings about the conclusion of this legal chapter. Outside the courthouse, beneath the imposing columns that had framed my professional life for 3 decades, Rebecca stood with Catherine and Maria, their unlikely sisterhood a powerful testament to resilience. Reporters had gathered, sensing the human interest potential in 3 women united by the same con man's betrayal. Miss Lawson, do you feel justice was served today? A journalist called out, thrusting a microphone toward Rebecca. She glanced at her companions before answering with remarkable poise. The justice system worked as it should. No sentence can fully restore what was taken from us and the other victims, but knowing Alexander Caldwell can't harm anyone else provides a measure of peace. "What's next for the three of you?" another reporter asked. Catherine stepped forward. "We've established the Trust Again Foundation to help victims of relationship fraud and financial exploitation. Our focus is on both recovery support and preventive education. This foundation, born from their shared trauma and funded partly by recovered assets, had quickly become Rebecca's passionate focus. In the months since leaving her corporate position, she had channeled her communications expertise into developing educational materials and outreach programs that were already receiving national attention. As the impromptu press conference concluded, I observed my daughter with quiet pride. The confident, professional addressing. Reporters bore little resemblance to the shattered woman who had appeared at my door at 1 a.m. 6 months earlier. The transformation wasn't just external. It reached to the core of how she understood herself and her place in the world. Later that evening, as we shared a quiet dinner at home, Rebecca finally addressed what the sentencing meant for her personally. "It's strange," she reflected, twirling pasta on her fork. "I thought I'd feel more, vindicated, triumphant, but mostly I just feel relieved it's over and sad that so many lives were damaged by one person's actions. That's a healthy response," I assured her. "Vengeance rarely brings the satisfaction people expect. Moving forward matters more than looking back." Rebecca nodded. Thoughtfully, the foundation is already helping people. We received 43 calls on our hotline just last week. People recognizing warning signs in their own relationships after seeing our public service announcements. The transition from victim to advocate had been the most powerful aspect of Rebecca's healing process. By channeling her experience into protection for others, she had reclaimed her personal agency and professional purpose simultaneously. "I'm returning to my house next week," she announced suddenly. "It's time," the statement surprised me. After 6 months, in the upstairs apartment of my home, Rebecca had established comfortable routines and seemed content with the arrangement. The house she had shared with Alexander remained a place of complicated memories despite being legally secured through the fraud investigation. "Are you sure?" I asked carefully. "There's no rush." "I'm sure," she confirmed with quiet confidence. "I've had the entire interior repainted, replaced the furniture, redesigned the master bedroom completely. It doesn't feel like our house anymore. It's mine now, and staying here, while wonderful, feels like hiding in some ways." The insight reflected the therapeutic work she had been doing, recognizing when protective measures become limitations rather than supports. "Besides," she added with a smile, "Maria is relocating here next month to help expand the foundation, and she'll need a place to stay while finding her own apartment. The upstairs guest room at my house is perfect for a temporary arrangement. The elegant symmetry of this plan, Rebecca, opening her reclaimed home to another of Alexander's victims, struck me as both healing and appropriate. The house that had been the site of betrayal would become a place of recovery and solidarity." As we finished dinner, Rebecca raised her glass in an impromptu toast to unexpected silver linings. "Without Alexander's betrayal, I would never have found my true calling or made such extraordinary friendships." I clinked my glass against hers, recognizing the profound wisdom in her ability to acknowledge positive outcomes without minimizing the trauma that preceded them. This balanced perspective, neither dwelling in victimhood nor denying genuine harm, represented the healthiest possible integration of her experience. "And 2, mothers who wear uniforms at 1 a.m., she added softly, her eyes meeting mine, with deep appreciation, who somehow know to prepare for storms before the clouds even gather. The acknowledgement brought unexpected emotion to my throat, recognition that my years of quiet vigilance, once resented as excessive, caution or lack of trust, were now understood as the protection they were always intended to be. In the courtroom, that morning, I had witnessed justice served through formal legal channels. But here, at my dining table, I was witnessing something equally powerful: the personal justice of reclaimed strength, repurposed pain, and renewed purpose. Alexander Caldwell had calculated that his victims would remain isolated in their shame and confusion. Instead, they had found each other and created something stronger than any one of them could have built alone. That I, reflected as I raised my glass in response to Rebecca's toast, was perhaps the most perfect justice of all. 1. A year ago today, I showed up at my mother's door at 1 a.m., completely shattered, Rebecca said, addressing the audience of nearly 300 people gathered in the hotel ballroom. I had just discovered my husband had emptied our accounts and disappeared. What I didn't know then was that my life wasn't ending. It was beginning a transformation I could never have imagined. I sat at the front table watching my daughter command the stage. At the first annual gala fundraiser for the Trust Again Foundation, in her elegant navy blue dress and with confident posture, she bore no resemblance to the broken woman who had arrived at my door exactly 1 year earlier. Beside me sat Catherine and Maria, the unlikely sisters in betrayal, who had become Rebecca's closest friends and business partners. What had begun as a victim support network had evolved into a nationally recognized nonprofit organization dedicated to both preventing relationship fraud and supporting its victims. The Trust Again Foundation exists because 3 women refused to be defined by victimhood, Rebecca continued. We chose instead to transform our experience into protection for others. In our first year, we've established support groups in 12 cities, created educational programs that have reached over 15,000 people, and provided direct financial assistance to 28 victims of relationship fraud who lost everything. The audience, a mixture of donors, survivors, law enforcement personnel, and community leaders, responded with enthusiastic applause. The foundation's rapid growth had exceeded even the most optimistic projections, fueled by extensive media coverage of the Alexander Caldwell case and the unusual collaboration between his 3 wives. Tonight, we're announcing our newest initiative, Rebecca said, her voice taking on additional gravity: the Financial Guardianship Program, which will provide specialized training for financial institutions to recognize and prevent exploitation of vulnerable individuals, particularly the elderly and recently bereaved. As Rebecca explained the program details, I felt a profound pride that transcended ordinary maternal satisfaction. My daughter had taken a devastating betrayal and alchemized it into something genuinely transformative, not just for herself, but for countless others who would be protected by the system she was helping to create. When the formal presentation concluded and dinner service began, I found myself approached by a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, whom I recognized as the district attorney for our county. Margaret Lawson, he greeted me warmly. Your daughter is doing remarkable work. Thank you, Mr. Daniels, I replied, pleasantly surprised he remembered me from the courthouse. It's been extraordinary to witness her journey. That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you, he said, lowering his voice slightly. I've been following the Foundation's work closely, particularly the preventive education aspects. We're establishing a new division focused on elder financial exploitation and relationship fraud. I'd like to have you a position as senior advisor. The unexpected proposal caught me completely off guard. Me? But I'm a bailiff, not an Ennis, attorney or investigator. Precisely why we want you, he explained. You have 30 years of courtroom experience observing how these cases unfold. More importantly, you recognize the warning signs in your daughter's situation and took preventive measures that ultimately helped catch a serial offender. That practical perspective is exactly what we need. I'm scheduled to retire from court services in 4 months, I said, considering the possibility with growing interest. Perfect timing, he replied with a smile. The position would begin next quarter. Part-time consultation, flexibility to continue supporting your daughter's foundation work. Think about it and call my office next week. As he moved away to greet other guests, I found myself contemplating this unexpected opportunity. After 30 years of maintaining order in the courthouse, the prospect of actively helping prevent the very crimes I had witnessed for decades held undeniable appeal. Later in the evening, as the formal program transitioned to a more relaxed networking reception, Rebecca joined me at a quiet corner table. "So," she said with a knowing smile, "Daniel Daniels offered you a position," Maria overheard and told me. I nodded, still processing. The possibility. Advisory role with the new Financial Crimes Division, focusing on prevention rather than just prosecution. "You should take it," Rebecca said without hesitation. "You'd be brilliant at it." "You think so?" I asked, genuinely valuing her perspective. "Mom, you prevented me from losing everything because you recognized patterns others missed. You knew exactly what system levers to pull when crisis hit. That knowledge shouldn't retire. When you do." Her confidence in my abilities warmed me deeply. For so many years, I had been the guide and mentor in our relationship. Now, increasingly, we functioned as equals, each recognizing and valuing the other's unique strengths and insights. "I'll consider it seriously," I promised. As the evening progressed, I observed Rebecca moving confidently through the crowd, comforting survivors with genuine empathy, discussing policy details with lawmakers, explaining educational initiatives to potential donors. The transformation from victim to advocate to leader had unfolded with remarkable speed, driven by her natural talents and the clarity of purpose that often emerges from profound trauma. Catherine approached, champagne flute in hand, following my gaze to where Rebecca was speaking with a state senator. "Hard to believe that's the same woman who showed up at our first video conference looking like she hadn't slept in days," she commented. "The foundation has been healing for all of you," I observed. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "We've each found different aspects of the work, particularly meaningful. Maria excels at the legal advocacy and policy development. I focus on the support, groups, and direct victim services. Rebecca," she gestured toward my daughter, now animatedly describing something to an engaged listener. "She's our voice, our strategist, our connector. She's found her calling." This assessment aligned with my own observations. Rebecca's professional skills in communications had found their perfect application in this new context, infused with the personal passion that comes from lived experience. As the gala concluded near midnight, Rebecca, Catherine, Maria, and I gathered for a private moment in a small anti-room off the main ballroom. Rebecca raised her glass in a toast. "To 1 year of turning pain into purpose," she said, "and to the woman who showed me how strength and justice work in the real world." She turned to me, eyes bright with emotion. "Mom, I wouldn't be standing here today if you hadn't put on that uniform at 1 a.m. and made that call to Michael. You showed me that we're not helpless against predators if we know how to work the systems designed to protect us." The word other women raised their glasses in agreement. "To Margaret," Catherine echoed, "who caught the man none of us could stop on our own." The acknowledgement touched me deeply, though I felt compelled to redirect some of the credit. "I made the call, but you three did the harder work of rebuilding and creating something meaningful from the wreckage." "That's what we do, isn't it?" Maria observed quietly. "As women, as survivors, we rebuild, we transform, we protect others." The simple truth of her statement resonated powerfully. Throughout human history, women had indeed transformed personal trauma into protection for others, creating systems, organizations, and networks designed to prevent the suffering they themselves had experienced. As we left the hotel later that night, Rebecca linking her arm through mine as we walked to the parking lot, I reflected on the remarkable journey of the past year. From that devastating 1 a.m. knock to this triumphant gala celebrating an organization that would protect countless vulnerable individuals. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but its direction had been consistently forward. "I've been thinking," Rebecca said as we reached my car, "about writing a book. Not just about Alexander and what happened to us, but about the larger patterns of relationship fraud and financial exploitation. Something that combines personal narrative with practical guidance. You should, I encouraged immediately. Your perspective is uniquely valuable. Professional communicator, survivor, and now advocate. Few people can bridge those worlds so effectively. She nodded, considering the possibility. I'd want to include your perspective too. The warning signs you recognized, the preparations you made, the immediate actions you took when crisis hit. That knowledge could help so many people. The idea of working side by side with my daughter, merging her sharp vision with my decades of courtroom experience, struck something deep in me. For 32 years, I had carried knowledge of how justice truly functioned, knowledge rarely shared beyond courthouse walls. I'd be honored, I told her, my voice steady but my heart swelling. We drove home through midnight streets. The city hushed, lamplight sliding across Rebecca's face as she leaned back against the headrest, exhaustion softening into something like peace. 1 year, she whispered, almost to herself. So much has changed. For the better, I answered, watching her reflection in the glass. Yes, she said firmly. As terrible as that night was, as devastating as Alexander's betrayal felt, I wouldn't trade the life I have now for the one I thought I wanted then. Her words carried the kind of wisdom born only from surviving fire. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving proof that growth doesn't bloom in spite of pain, but often because of it. The foundation is only beginning, she continued, her voice taking on that thoughtful cadence I had come to recognize. Preventive education, policy advocacy, support services, we've only scratched the surface. But what we've created already will outlast Alexander's damage. We've turned his betrayal into something that protects others. As our home came into view, the home that had cradled her collapse and now held the weight of her rebirth, I realized our relationship, too, had been remade. We were no longer just mother and daughter. We had become partners, equals, bound by shared purpose. Alexander Caldwell, rotting in a federal cell, had unknowingly birthed a coalition of women who refused to be broken. He had unleashed something far stronger than his schemes, a network turning trauma into armor. And that, I thought, as we stepped back inside the house that had witnessed both devastation and rebirth, might be the purest form of justice imaginable. 2 years later, I stood once again in my familiar place inside a courtroom as Judge Martinez's words rang out. The defendant is hereby sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, plus 5 years supervised release. Another predator caught. Another life defended. But this case carried a different weight. The victim, a 78-year-old widow, had recognized the warning signs because of one of Rebecca's seminars. One desperate phone call to the Trust Again hotline had uncovered a scheme targeting 14 elderly clients. As the gavel fell, I saw Rebecca slip quietly into the back row, observing, learning, ready. Another one down, she said softly when we met in the hallway, her tone carrying quiet triumph. Thanks to you, I replied. Margaret Wilson would never have seen the truth without your seminar. She shrugged modestly, but the pride in her eyes betrayed her. The foundation only gave her knowledge. She had the courage to act. We walked together through courthouse corridors alive with humanity, attorneys, defendants, witnesses, life and law colliding as always. Rebecca moved now with calm authority, as if these halls had always belonged to her. Bellini's, the Italian restaurant near the courthouse, had become our refuge. Over plates of pasta and the soft clink of wine glasses, I watched Rebecca, Catherine, and Maria, 3 women bound, not by victimhood, but by rebirth. Catherine had built victim services into 14 states. Maria, now an attorney, led the legal division with fierce precision. And Rebecca had become the voice, the fire, the one whose words carried across a nation. Elizabeth Morgan, a retired school principal, approached our table timidly that afternoon. She had recognized Rebecca from her TED Talk. Her eyes brimmed as she thanked us, explaining how her sister had been saved from another predator because of the Foundation's resources. Your work saved her dignity, she said. Not just her money, her trust, her life. When she left, silence fell around our table, thick with meaning. These were the ripples of change, proof that our pain had become something greater than ourselves. This is why we do it, Maria murmured, raising her glass. Yes, I whispered, watching the women I once saw shattered, now shining with purpose. Talk turned inevitably to Alexander, still behind bars, still manipulating even within prison walls, but his petitions for leniency were being met with the same cold truth that had finally caged him. His power was gone. Ours remained. Months passed. Years turned. And on the day of my retirement, after 32 years as a bailiff, I took an oath I had never imagined this time as county commissioner. The same Bible beneath my hand, the same weight of responsibility in my chest, but a new horizon. Rebecca's eyes met mine from the front row, pride unspoken but radiant. Catherine and Maria sat beside her, their presence a reminder of how far we had come since that midnight knock. Commissioner Lawson, Rebecca teased at the reception. Not sure I'll ever get used to that. Neither will I smiled, lifting my glass. But justice wears many uniforms. This is just another. The Trust Again Foundation had grown to 20 states, training programs adopted by the Justice Department itself. Catherine's son, inspired, was headed to law school. Maria was engaged. Rebecca advised Congress. And I had stepped from the courtroom to the policy table, still carrying the same mission, to protect the vulnerable. Later, as we stood in the courthouse atrium, sunlight spilling through high windows, Rebecca said quietly, "That night I knocked on your door. I had no idea it would lead here." "None of us did," I admitted. "But you were ready," she said. "You had your uniform, your plans, your faith in justice. You saw what I couldn't." I shook my head gently. "I saw patterns, but I never saw this." I gestured toward her, toward the movement she had built. She smiled knowingly. Life's most important journeys often begin with a single desperate step in the dark. And she was right. As we stepped outside into the sunlight, her arm linked through mine, I understood the truth. Alexander had tried to destroy us. Instead, he had sparked a legacy, one that spiraled outward, from daughter to mother, from family to community, from community to nation. Justice, I realized, is never finished. It only transforms, carried forward by those willing to answer its call, whether at 1 o'clock in the morning or in the broad light of day.